Show me the money.
Hey, it's me. Knock, knock. So, you got my money?
Think about it. You're dealing with numbers all day long. Decimal points, high frequencies, bang, bang, bang. Digits, all very acidic, above the shoulders mustard shit. Right? Kind of wig some people out. Right? You gotta feed the geese to keep the blood flowing. Now keep the rhythm below the belt.
I want to stay in Arizona. I want my new contract. Show me the money! Jerry, you better yell! Show me the money!
Where's my money? You gonna give me my money? Where's my money, man?
All right, and so for part 2 of this episode of Capstrapped, if you didn't watch part 1 and you just stumbled across this, you can check out part 1 with the full breakdown and analysis of what it means to trade for a player with a first-round pick. But basically, I just wanted to do a quick final conclusion and then rank the trades based on what I perceive to be the best value in terms of what's given up and the leverage that you give to the player once you bring them in. And so we're just going to run through that real quick. So right off the bat, I ranked any situation where the player has a number of years remaining and you don't have to immediately give out a contract pretty highly. Obviously, Minkah Fitzpatrick the most so because he had only finished his rookie season when he was traded. And then Stephon Diggs after that, and Odell Beckham Jr. after that. Now, you may say that another player on this list has given more of an impact. I certainly would agree with that, probably quite a few of them, than Odell Beckham Jr. since the trade. But, you have to be really confident in your projection for the player that you're trading for. You have to be really confident in the projection of the player that you want to bring into your organization. And so I'm not going to really judge that, I'm not necessarily judging a team for that, but I'm looking more so at, all of the other factors that I can look at and make, predictive analysis about. So if when Odell Beckham Jr. went to the Browns, I could have, just as anybody else said, oh, he's going to be so good for them, or, oh, he's going to be a distraction and he's just not himself anymore, he's too hurt. Anybody can say that stuff and nobody really knows how it's going to work out, but what we can understand is all of the other factors and what's likely to be an outcome of them. So when you bring in a player who is a relative proven commodity and you have cost control for multiple years, now, the Steelers have had Minkah Fitzpatrick for 2 years, and they'll probably have him for at least one more before they have to extend him. And if they don't want to extend him, they can have him for even another year after that and let him go in free agency or, trade him at some point. Stephon Diggs, they've had him for 1 year. They should have another few years before they extend him if they want to extend him. Odell Beckham Jr., they've already had him for 2 years. They could have him for another few years, however many they want, before they trade or release him or extend him. And the beauty of picking up these guys with a substantial number of years remaining and only doing one first-round pick is there's really no pressure that you have to extend them. It doesn't make you look bad. It's not embarrassing. So if you have a good number of years where you roll with these guys and really get a good feel for what it is that they do for you, you can decide whether you want to extend them or not. And if you don't, it's fine because you've gotten the value in return for your first-round pick. So the proven commodity is a value in this situation, for sure. The cost control is a value, for sure. And one versus multiple first-round picks is a value, for sure. So they're my top 3. As you go down the list, you hit another couple of players who are all kind of in the same category. You've got DeForest Buckner, Brandon Cooks, Amari Cooper, and Frank Clark. These are all the players who got one first-round pick as compensation and had anywhere from 2 years remaining to the franchise tag only remaining. And then of course, with these guys, we can see what happened with their contract extensions with the new team. Brandon Cooks tied for third most highly compensated upon signing. Amari Cooper, second most highly compensated on signing. And Frank Clark, third most highly compensated on signing. And DeForest Buckner on top at number 4, second most highly compensated at signing. And so the reason that these are my 4 through 7 rankings, one, again, the first round pick versus multiple first round picks is a value. The proven commodity is a value. Now, you're dropping down significantly in value compared to Minkah Fitzpatrick, Stephon Diggs, or Odell Beckham Jr. because you're going to have to make an extension offer to these guys. Because you're giving up a first round pick, you basically commit to extending these guys, because if you don't, it's a poorly used first round pick, which you could have used on a player that you could have for 4 or 5 years of cost control if you actually drafted a player. So the reason I have these here are they're all premier positions, interior defensive line, wide receiver, and edge. I like all of these. The only reason that I really, put one over the other is just because I liked how with when you're in this type of situation, you really need to look strongly at why is this player moving on? Why does the team that he's on not view him as worthy of retention and extension? And that's what puts DeForest Buckner at the top versus Frank Clark at the bottom. DeForest Buckner, tremendous player, and he was just on a defensive line in the 49ers situation where they had Eric Armstead, they had Solomon Thomas, they had to extend Eric Armstead, they had to... they knew Joey Bosa was going to need an extension. They knew they had a bunch of players that they needed to pay, and it was just such a deep defensive line that somebody had to go. So for the Colts to understand that, make a trade for a first-round pick, and then get the player under contract almost immediately, thus kind of decreasing the amount of time build up before you end up having to kind of bend over backwards to appease the contract demands. That's why it's my number 4. Brandon Cooks, they also signed him in the same offseason as trading for him. Now, you look at why he left. Well, the Patriots, they just probably didn't really have the money for him. They like to cycle through players and change their scheme up a little bit. Then Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper was just on a totally rebuilding team, and he also hadn't been playing that well under John Gruden, so I felt like it was probably a pretty solid swing on that. Now, he had 2 years remaining, and they played out both of those years, and then he actually went to free agency, and one of the reasons I like that is because they might have had to go down the path of highest paid with him if they had gotten something done prior to free agency, but once they allowed him to go to free agency, he kind of saw what his value was with the rest of the teams out there. And then Frank Clark is my last, just because when you traded for him in the franchise tag, now, why did he leave Seattle? He was a good pass rusher. It's not like Seattle had just this overwhelming wealth of pass rushers. In fact, they went so far as trading for more pass rushers, the next year and kind of really lacking edge talent overall. So why did Frank Clark have to move on? Well, obviously there was a disagreement about his value between his agent and the team, or else they would have extended him. So when you're bringing him in for the Kansas City Chiefs, you're taking on a player that, aside from really anything else, that the team just didn't value him as highly. So not that that's the end of the world, but it definitely decreases the value a little bit for me. And they had to sign him immediately. and make him the third highest paid at his position. Now we get down into all of the players who had 2 first-round picks surrendered for them. Matthew Stafford is my highest ranked out of these, primarily because of the value of the quarterback position. He hasn't signed an extension. He hasn't even played it down for them yet, obviously. And depending on what happens with that extension, I might potentially rank this higher. But based on everything we've looked at so far in terms of the predictive nature of this, putting these factors together, my guess is it's going to be a pretty substantial extension. And if they don't extend him, then what are you doing trading 2 first-round picks for a quarterback who is only going to play for you for a couple of years? It just doesn't make any sense. Then you're back at square one. And then Jalen Ramsey comes in at number 9. All of these are relatively close. The reason that Ramsey is over any of these is because he signed with less of a gap between himself and the other cornerbacks in the market. So, he did jump $2.75 million over Tre'Davious White, but he was signing around the same time as Marlon Humphrey, who's only a little below him. And so he's closer to the actual quarterback market, a cornerback market, despite the fact that he is first overall. Now, as you drop down to Khalil Mack and Laramie Tunsil, now the reason these guys are so low is because when you traded for them and you got them in, you had to shell out so much higher than the market as it was. I mean, like we said before, Khalil Mack over a $4 million jump over the previous number 1. Laramie Tunsil, a $4 million jump over the previous number 1. And then down at the last, I do have Jamal Adams, because based on everything predictive here, he's going to make a large salary jump over the other players at his position. And also, he's a non-premier position. So you have a safety who plays kind of a unique role. He's a bit of a pass rusher, but he's not a full-time pass rusher, and he's not a full-time coverage guy. He's, a truly unique box safety, and he's very good, but the amount of salary cap space you end up designating to that player, it's already probably higher than you would like in terms of value. And then when you make this, trade package and give him that leverage for negotiations, it's just going to go even higher. So that's just my quick final breakdown, my final conclusion about these guys, and my rankings of who did the best job bringing in these players. And again, this is not necessarily outright impact. I mean, if you're looking down this list, probably the player who's made the single biggest impact, especially with a larger sample size, would be Khalil Mack. He was very good for a few years. Jalen Ramsey was tremendous last year. And Stephon Diggs was very good last year. DeForest Buckner, very good. Now, it's like I said, it's not a ranking of which were the most productive or the most impactful. But when you combine all of the situations, what you had to give up for them, what kind of cost control do you have, how much of a proven commodity were they, and what did you have to shell out when you did do a new contract, if at all. So let me know if you agree with any of this stuff or disagree. I want to kind of get a feel for what people think about it. I mean, there's a lot of kind of anecdotal, 2 first-round picks is so much for an expensive player and this and that, which is true in some way, but really comparing it to what other options for trading for veteran players are, I feel like this is probably the first time someone's really looked at it, at least in this lens. So let me know what you think, and if you agree, if you disagree, if you feel like there's an aspect that I wasn't really considering for this. And we'll see you next week.